Okay.
Everyone, today's interview is about global healthcare systems. It's talking about how cultures think. It's talking about the patient perspective on health. So, if you are in medical affairs, if you are curious about patient centricity, patient engagement, and thinking about patient needs, and you're curious about just how it all comes together, you're going to care about today's discussion. Our guest today this is the first time we've actually had her on before. She's the host of Faces of Digital Health, and she's a business developer for a healthcare IT company. It's called Better, and their website is better.care. Um, and I'm gonna completely butcher her name, and I'm really afraid of saying this, but I'm gonna do it anyways. Tjasa Zajc. Uh,
That's good.
that's close. She's very kind. I already know I've butchered it, so it's fine. She's gonna tell us how to pronounce it right. So keep listening in. I'm really lucky to have her because I sort of saw her talk about her story a little bit on Twitter, and I was like, I just have to hear more about what she is thinking, what she's talking about. So I was really excited to have her on. You can find her actually on LinkedIn, and you can see it across the screen right now, linkedin.com/in/Tjasa Zajc. And you can also go to her website, facesofdigitalhealth.com. You can also find her on Twitter. And I'm not even going to try to do that one. Uh, could you tell me how you pronounce that on Twitter?
Just the Zajc, Tjasa, I would say. So, like,
Okay.
Tjasa Zajc is the name.
Okay, fair enough. I was like, wait, what? How did? And that makes sense now. It was way easier than I thought. Zajc, and again, Faces of Digital Health. So, welcome. Thank you so much for coming. I do want to say that if you like what you're listening to, please leave a comment, please subscribe. I do also want to say that if you ask questions, I know she would appreciate it. I would appreciate it. You can always find me on Twitter at Darshan Talks. Go to my website, DarshanTalks.com. This is the Darshan Talks live stream, and I'm your host, Darshan Kulkarni. So, Tjasa, let's talk a little bit about your journey, about why you have this website, Faces of Digital Health, because I thought that journey was kind of interesting. So start us off from there.
Okay, so very quickly, I used to be a journalist for over 10 years. I worked as a medical journalist for over 4 years, so focusing really on the novelties in the clinical practice, new therapies that were coming to the market, and this magazine was specifically dedicated to doctors and pharmacists, so really clinical content. But already in 2015, I started noticing how big of an impact digitalization is having on healthcare, and it became clear to me that it's very soon going to be kind of embedded in every sphere of medicine. So I thought this is something that I should look more closely into and follow more closely. And I started the podcast Faces of Digital Health in 2017. I think that's, yeah, 2017. It's been running for 5 years now, and just trying to look at how different healthcare systems around the world adopt technology and approach healthcare digitalization, just because the design of healthcare system differs so much across the world. I transitioned to the healthcare IT industry during that time, but I still continued with the podcast just because I love talking to people. I always loved journalism, but being on the other side, so working inside the industry, is something that gives me a lot more insight into the way just the whole product development looks like, what the challenges are for the end users. And I think the combination of the two, so kind of journalism or talking to people on the one hand, and just combining the inside view of the product development, really helps me with just interesting conversations that I have on the show.
So when you talk about your journey, your personal journey, you said one of the reasons you got into this was your own experiences and your interest, if you will. So could you talk a little bit about your journey? You mentioned right before we got on that you're in Switzerland right now.
Mhm.
Where are you normally based out of?
So I'm based in Ljubljana, Slovenia.
Okay.
That's but my sister lives in Switzerland, and I'm just in the middle of visiting her after quite a long time. I guess my journey started when I was in high school, and I got diagnosed with IBD, which didn't stop me from pursuing journalism, which is it's not exactly a stressless kind of a job. And while I was working for one of the national magazines in Slovenia, the editor said that it would be good if I specialized for something. And at that time, education and healthcare still weren't covered. So I said I'd just try healthcare. And I also did a master's in healthcare management and economics to get a better understanding of, on the one hand, why does my patient experience differ so much from what the policy side and what healthcare is supposed to look like.
So you talk about what healthcare is supposed to look like. You talk about how it's different across the globe. What has been the most interesting thing to you as a patient to see in how healthcare systems are developed across the country, like across the world? Is there a commonality? Are they all working with the interest of the patient at heart, as far as you can tell?
Um, I think not. There's probably a lot of people that are not gonna be very happy with me saying that. I think like in the US, I see that the system is so broken that there's just so many opportunities to solve issues, which just creates additional levels of intermediaries. And potentially, from my perspective, is just making the whole system more expensive. So in the US, we are consistently hearing about horror stories of patients just being horrified of going to the ER because they fear costs, or they don't know what their deductible is going to be like, or they go to a pharmacy with a prescription just to realize that they need their prescription to be just signed off by the insurance company, and that doesn't happen. So it's just levels and levels of complexities which don't go under what we call patient centricity. At the same time, it's also amazing to see what kind of innovations are happening in the US. And because the system is structured the way that is, because it's private, there is more opportunities for healthcare innovators to get their solutions to the patients, and for them to be able to maybe have an insurance that's going to cover those things. So when we are talking about the technological advancements, I think there's so much inspiration that we can see in the US. I also think that just China is amazing in its AI development, and I just wish there was more transparency for us to be able to dig into, what kind of things are happening in China. It's just, it's very difficult to get speakers from China to share those experiences. Apart from that, I guess in Europe, we pride ourselves with accessibility to healthcare, but that still differs from country to country. Patients face different restrictions based on the country that they're in, or accessibility to medications. So we do have to say, it's Europe is far from perfect. If we just look at the whole healthcare data space, there's this new legislation that's in place on the European Union level. So the European Health Data Space, which aims to by 2025 ensure that patients across Europe have access to their healthcare data and can share their data, or can limit access to their data to healthcare providers across Europe, meaning that even if you come from Croatia and go to Spain, the doctor there is supposed to be able to see the basic or the main information about your healthcare, and also you are supposed to be able to pick up medications regardless of where you are in Europe. And that's huge because language is a huge barrier across Europe. I think a lot about why some things aren't happening in Europe when we see them happening in the US, and that's, for example, the inclusion in clinical trials. Just being involved in a clinical trial that say you come again from Italy and you want to participate in a clinical trial in France or Spain, it's not just that you might need to relocate. You do need to understand the language or potentially speak the language so you can communicate with the doctor or the team that's going to be in charge of the clinical trials. So language is just a huge barrier that's a little bit less seen maybe in the US, because if we exclude the minorities, the majority of people does speak English. I think I
So
went into like 10 different directions. Sorry about that.
no, I thought the directions were amazing, and thank you for doing that. There are two that are particularly interesting to me. The first one was in the healthcare data space, and you talked about this new rule, and it's not a space I get into as much, but you're talking about the access to data and limiting of data. Um, it reminds me of this conversation on security and privacy and that tension and that push and pull. How, I mean, Europe is famous or infamous for GDPR, depending on how you look at it. I think it's a great concept. The execution is very difficult to do, which as a journalist, as someone who is involved in healthcare systems, as an IT person, you're probably quite familiar with. So my question for you is, when you look at these systems, do you find that there are good goals, but they're very woefully silent on the execution mechanism on how you deliver on something like that in a way that exposes patients to risks that they hadn't considered? For example, I want to be sitting in Slovenia and act. Well, I want to be a Slovenian citizen accessing healthcare in Spain, and you want the data to be available to both places. Doesn't that necessarily create a risk because the data might be more susceptible from a security perspective? I see you're saying
No,
something more.
no, I don't think that's a problem, because in order to achieve the European health data space, the underlying healthcare infrastructure is going to have to be designed in a way to enable security and just avoid those risks. And yeah, I mean, data standards come into play here in order for this to even be possible. But I think we have to separate from just the two problems that arise here. So just one part of the problem is the whole cybersecurity aspect, and the second problem is the infrastructure that's even going to enable the use of common standards that enable the interoperability that the European health data space is aiming to provide. But given how very cautious Europe is when it comes to data privacy, this is something where I, as a European citizen, have basically no worries that things would go wrong, because a lot of things don't happen in Europe because of just the whole privacy concerns, and because of the legislation that's put in place. But at the same time, I think that while we're putting a lot of emphasis on how the structure and the architecture is supposed to be done, in the long run, I think that might bring us to a more sustainable and future-proof solutions, because unlike because the system is going to be less fragmented.
Absolutely, and I think that that's the advantage, right? The fact that if the system is less fragmented, that results in better quality of care, and that, I guess, is a really nice spot to talk about better.care. But it results in a better quality of care for patients. But my question then becomes, if you are in that space and you're trying to give patients access to this, do you foresee that means that there will be more research that happens in Europe? Because, like you just said, you can now start delving into that data a little bit more and start saying, you know what, I have a patient in Slovenia, I have a patient in Italy, and I can now get that data across multiple systems and know exactly where these patients are, and therefore find them and do the studies more efficiently and potentially even drop the cost of the studies themselves.
Yeah, so there's kind of two sides of that issue. One of the ideas of the European health data space is also to create a pool of data of European patients for researchers, but they would also only be available to use anonymized data and even not download any data, but just get results on the research that they will do. A lot of research at the moment is done on national level. So, for example, French has a secure national database of health data for rare diseases. Finland is very known and I guess a front runner in the secondary use of data. So they have the Finnish Social and Health Data Permit Authority called Findata, where you can apply as a researcher to access this data and yeah, do whatever you need to do. But of course, you need to have your request approved by this organization. And if you look at the Findata's website, they also have clear pricings regarding what any research costs. So in essence, yes, the European health data space does predict that more research is going to be done on the European level. However, because the data is anonymized, I don't think you could do what, if I understood you correctly, you were trying to pinpoint that maybe you could really just because of this database find a specific patient that you want to help to.
So two parts to that, and I think you're right to a certain extent. I just didn't know what level the data was anonymized and not anonymized. I think you're talking, for example, about policy 70 and policy 43. Is that what you're thinking about when you? Fair enough. I do a little bit of work in the transparency space, and that's where policy 70, policy 43 comes in, where they talk about clinical trial results and putting those results out there. The and you're right, in that situation, you do have to anonymize the data. One of the struggles you have in the transparency world is using 3 bits of information, you can identify any individual across the world. So it's kind of interesting to me to realize that there'll just be a bigger treasure trove of data that will be available. Yes, it means that there are ways to break that anonymization, but overall, I think it results in better quality of care for the patient, and it results in better opportunities for care of the patient, and the patient having more access to their own information. Um, do, if you were coming at this knowing your own background in health IT, knowing your own background in patient sort of centricity, how would you design the system to be more patient centric?
Um, I would have to think about that. Let me just give me a
Take your time.
minute. That's a really good question, and a question that I actually get asked a few times. Like, what's the best healthcare system in the world? How would you design it? But in essence, I guess it's it's almost impossible to just kind of find a universal system that would be fair, or yeah, fair to everyone. And that's just because we, as people from different backgrounds, different cultures, have different values, and systems are always designed based on consensus about what we decide to do as a society. So it's like, why does Singapore have a savings account for healthcare, and you just have to have that in order to pay for healthcare? Or why is the NHS system better because it's all text based? What's the right way? Every healthcare system has its just good sides and bad sides. So yeah, I mean, from the patient perspective, the ideal scenario would be to have a system that enables you to just get care when you need it, to have no waiting times, to just get medications that you need, and to not fear that you're going to be bankrupt because of your illness. And when we talk about these issues, I guess we don't, apart from the cancer care, we rarely talk about survivorship, and what does it mean to, for example, be a chronic patient. One of the topics that I'm researching at the moment is the right to be forgotten. So for
Mm.
cancer patients, after they are just clinically defined as cancer free, that's usually after 5 years without a relapse, then the doctors will say you're free from cancer, you're cured, now go live your life. But what happens is that the everyday life is not the same as for someone that has never been sick. You in some countries you won't be able to get a loan. You will be discriminated against for
Oh,
just for life insurance and things like that. Or it's much more difficult to get a job, because the employer might see you as a risk, as someone who's just going to be on sick leave too much. So there's a lot of aspects that are related to what does it actually mean to have a diagnosis in the past, or just to have a chronic disease and just be discriminated against. So it's a complicated question.
it is a complicated question. And thank you for reminding me and the audience that it is not as simple as what's the best out there. It reminds me of when I do a fair bit of travel, and everyone always asks me what's your favorite country, and I always struggle with how do you answer that, because each country has its own give and take. Each country is beautiful and unique in its own way, and why wouldn't healthcare systems be any different?
Yeah.
Um, so I guess my next question as I start looking at this is you talk about cybersecurity. You talk about the 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 ideal system being one where patients can access care, drug, and medications as they need it when they need it. My two questions that come out of it is let me take the first question. When you talk about this care system where everything's accessible, do you think that that's a realistic goal? And I'll tell you why I say that. The only way to achieve what you're saying is by having a near unlimited budget to give someone as much access to as much medication as they possibly want. And unfortunately, we aren't just patients. We're also, for example, taxpayers. And as a taxpayer, there's a limit to what I'm willing to pay into that system. So, how do you advise as you see these healthcare systems across the world, and advise is probably the wrong word, but how do you see that give and take um, of people being more than one thing and having more than one goal at the same time,
Mhm.
depending on what hat they wear?
Um, uh, Sustainability in healthcare is definitely a global problem. So, sometimes people would ask me, if you had a magic wand, what would you change in healthcare? And they expect, I don't know, that I will say that, AI is not going to be just an idea, but is going to be implemented in its full idealistic sense. So, you just come to the doctors, get, I don't know, a blood test or just a scan, and then bam, you get a diagnosis, and you get a precision therapy that's tailor-made for you and your
Yeah.
specifics, and you're good in a week. So that's kind of, the big picture of the optimism of futurism of AI in healthcare. The realistic problems, however, are the growing workforce shortages, and that's basically one of the things that I would fix if I could with a magic wand. And that's because if you don't have enough workforce, if the workforce is increasingly burdened by technology also, then the problem becomes that the waiting times expand, and basically access to healthcare is diminished. So um, what would my advice be? Again, tough
I,
question, and I think I got lost in my thoughts a little bit.
no, I guess what I was really thinking, as a patient, how do you aren't just a patient, you're also a taxpayer. And if you had to choose, do you give more money into your taxes so that you have better health care? Would you be willing to do that, and to what extent would you do that if you could give 90%
Right,
of wealth to get
right.
better?
I know yeah, I get what you're saying, and I guess I my answer would be pretty much the same as before, and that is that it's really difficult to give more away than what you're already used to. So, for example, in Slovenia, we don't. I'm disappointed by the way elderly care is taken care of, and I'm disappointed because I know how things work in Austria. I know how things work in Denmark. In Denmark, you would just, it's like, as I was told, it's also culturally expected that you're not going to be the burden of your family, of maybe your relatives or your just sons or daughters if you have them. Whereas in many countries, that's kind of still the case. But if you have a system where the system is designed that you pay more taxes. So when you do get old and maybe you do need elderly care or you do need a caregiver that's going to come to your home a few times a day or a week, so you can stay at home, you don't need to move into a care facility, then that kind of system is much more attractive from my perspective. But are we as a society willing to pay more for that? The answer is no. It's like there's a lot of problems that we're trying to solve in across the world, but just getting that consensus to do like country B is doing is something that's impossible because politics is involved, and that's a big just obstacle to the changes in the healthcare system. You saw that yourself with how difficult it was to accept Obamacare. Now, just consider how difficult it would be to just change anything again. I mean, drug pricing is one of the big issues that's being addressed in the U.S., and you can just you know how hot of a debate that is.
Yeah, I do a little bit of work in drug pricing, so it's always interesting to me, and it's fascinating to me that the globe is looking at the U.S. and it's I look at Reddit and I look at Twitter, and everyone talks about how horrible and broken the system is in the U.S. And the truth is, it is without a doubt. I think my personal opinion is that the system in the US can be improved, but it will never quite be the system in Europe. And the reason it won't ever be the system in Europe is exactly the reasons you said, which is there are different cultural norms, different expectations, and just different ways that the US wants to spend its money. And
Hmm.
and that will have an implication. However, to your other point, I think you could probably make better choices. I think in the US, for example, we spend the most money in the world to not get the best outcomes. I think that's the problem. Um, but how do you balance that all out? Let me ask you one last question because we're already out of time. We're well past time. But my last question is: you talk about AI and you talk about the how everyone is enamored by the beauty of AI. My experience with AI or just predictive algorithms in general is that they create this chicken or the egg situation where sometimes a system might go, you're at a risk of developing diabetes. So we're going to have all these other things that happen. So whether or not you were going to develop diabetes, you're now set into a system that may essentially force diabetes on you because of the way the system works. My question for you is, what is the biggest horror story you think AI will have? I mean, you talk about China and the opacity of AI, or at least the opacity of the impact of AI in China. And I don't want to pick on China because every country is going to have its own version of this relatively quickly. I mean, I'm sure you heard about Lambda from Google.
Yeah.
So we don't know what the future holds, but the, the the question really is, what is the whole? Everyone talks about the beauty of AI. Tell me what you think the horror of AI could be in healthcare.
Well, I think the horror in AI is already happening with us discovering the bias that's happening
Yeah.
because of the use of algorithms. There are already a lot of horror stories about AI in healthcare and the discrimination that it can cause. However, I would turn that thought a little bit around, maybe on the positive note, by
Okay.
saying that we are enough risk averse, and just healthcare is so strongly regulated that we are already recognizing the problems with the AI algorithms and are not rushing too much into just the broad scale just use of AI in healthcare. One thing that's also worth remembering is that, we are maybe a little bit unfair towards AI because we expect it to be 100% accurate, where doctors make mistakes all the time. People die from medical errors all the time. So, just from a theoretical point of view, it would perhaps be better if we just try to be happy with the small improvements that we can achieve with the help of AI, and not expect perfection from the get-go. Of course, that's easier said than done because we do talk about um, personal lives, and when you get those in the mix, yeah, we just want to be 100% sure, and that's just yeah, unrealistic, but maybe a reminder that we should have, maybe comparing what improvements do we achieve with the help of tools instead of just expecting the 100% accuracy.
I think that's a really interesting idea. I think, and I thank you for that. I would add a bit of caution to that, and I think that the reason I would add caution to your caution is 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 the idea that I think an individual doctor, you're right, can make mistakes, and they do, and we all do. I'm a pharmacist by profession as well. I don't know if I'd mentioned that earlier, but clinicians make mistakes all the time. The difference is that the clinician can have only a limited impact of only the patients they are taking care of. On the other hand, AI, if implemented, will by design have a global impact, or at least a national impact, or at least a much larger impact than an individual doctor.
This
And
is where I would disagree.
oh, love it! I love a good disagreement. Please go
Yeah,
ahead.
this is where I would disagree because when we talk about AI algorithms, I think one thing that's become very clear already is that you can't just build a model and scale it across the world, across the country, across institutions even. Even when you transmit one AI model to another hospital, a lot of fine tuning and readjustment has to be made so the data or the algorithms are accurate for that specific data set.
Oh, I agree with that, but wouldn't the question then be you're applying it to that individual data set first, and then you're going to apply it across the institution if you can, and if that works, then you're going to try to outlicense it to the healthcare system, and then the healthcare system is going to try to sell it or resell it to the insurance company, which will then apply it nationwide.
Mhm.
So I I guess my difference is a doctor can still only treat his or her patients. The AI is designed ideally to have a larger impact. Uh,
Mhm.
though to your point, it would be more iterative as opposed to a one-off, if you will, turn on a switch and it's ready to go. But you disagree with me, and I love the fact that you disagree with me. You want to say something? Please go ahead.
No, 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 no. I think it's just like the topic that you're now opening is something that we can schedule another call for, because it's just like we could yeah, keep opening up the issues. But if I wanted to stay optimistic and just I was thinking about the topic that we titled this discussion to, the impact of AI in life sciences on patient centricity. Let's just hope that over time, we're going to get to the personalized medication management with the help of digital twins, really getting medications that will be suitable for you, where we'll be able to avoid polypharmacy because drug development is going to be so advanced and hopefully faster, because even pharma companies are going to have a much easier time recruiting patients because they'll be able to find them faster with the help of screening programs enhanced by AI to really find the patients that they want to help to. I think one thing that I would just finish the discussion with is the fact that data gathering is increasing, and we can't go back, and that's one of the things that's very interesting to look at from the patient perspective. So we'll see where things take us, and we have large expectations from the legislators to keep us safe. That's at least how I feel in Europe. I think that many people don't like GDPR, but at least I can feel relatively safe that data security is not something that I additionally should spend a lot of time thinking about, because there's someone I can trust that's going to take care of that.
So much more I could talk about that. So I'm going to touch. Maybe that's a future conversation. Um, Tjasa, did I do that right?
Yes.
Sort of. Thank you so much for coming on. This was amazing. So thank you again. Just to remind everyone, how can people reach you?
On Twitter, ZAJCTJASA is my handle, and on LinkedIn, I think it's pretty much the same, or actually, it's the other way around. So just LinkedIn. If you type in Tjasa Zajc, you'll find me.
Perfect. And again, please go to our website, facesofdigital.digitalhealth.com, or you can go to I believe her employer at better.care. I also want to emphasize that none of what we discussed was legal advice, and it does not necessarily represent the opinions of the host, the guest, our employers, or our clients. Thank you again. This was amazing.
Thank you.